Hey, good morning, ROCKPOINT. I wanted to share just something that God has been working in my heart about through the book of Mark, chapter 5, verses 24 through 34. It says this, it says, "And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him." Side note, I had to look up what thronged mean. It just means a bunch of people kind of gathered closely together. Anyways, and there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment. For she said, "If I touch even his garments, I'll be made well." And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." What's so awesome about this is not only does it show that, yes, Jesus is a God who can heal any sickness and any disease, but something amazing that God has just been showing me is that is how in the Old Testament, when people would come to worship, they would have to be ceremonially clean. And if anything that was ceremonially unclean had touched them, they'd have to go through this whole process to become clean again, just to be able to come into the presence of the tabernacle and into the temple. And if they were unclean and went into the presence of God, they could literally die. And so what's amazing here is this woman who had been bleeding for so many years was ceremonially unclean. And according to law, if this woman would have touched someone else, the person that she had touched would become unclean, and they'd have to go through this process to again become clean again, so they could go and sacrifice and worship God. And what's amazing about Jesus is when the unclean woman touched him, he didn't actually become unclean, but he made the woman clean. And so it just blows my mind to just the holiness and the goodness of our God, that he totally switches everything and throws everything on his head, that no longer do we have to come clean before him, but God makes us clean. So we can come to him broken in our hurts, in our habits, and our hang-ups, and we can come to him in our uncleanliness, and he comes and he makes us clean. He mends the brokenness of ourselves back together. And that's something that has been so encouraging to me these past couple weeks, and I hope that encourages you. Be blessed. See ya.